All right, so we are back on the W.A.D.E concept. And folks, I have been trying my best to, I think, give a fair assessment of the Netflix MVP MMA card. And I know you guys are probably tired of talking about this card, and we want to see what's next in the future for them. And I thought I did a pretty good job of keeping a level head in yesterday's video and just speaking on what the truth of the event was, what happened versus what the expectation was, and what the product looked like versus what we were sold, right? I think I've done a pretty good job of keeping things neutral as best I can. But today, I have to say it, there's some delusion going on with the MVP side of things. There just is. Now, I'm not even talking about when Jake Paul says that they are essentially competition for the UFC and that they're here to take the game over. That's delusion on a whole different level. Like, that's just Jake trying to be a marketer and sell things. Although I do think he genuinely believes that to some degree because Jake is a delusional person. But even Nakisa today caught himself in Lulu land a bit. And I'm kind of shocked because for the most part, Nakisa's a pretty level-headed guy. He likes to keep a low profile. He doesn't really get too high, get too low, say things that are so out of line and absolutely absurd and make no sense that I'm really able to do a video on something like this. But he was on Ariel Helwani's show today, and there's a couple of clips that I want to react to from the actual attendance. We got the figures to, what they want to do on Netflix as a, partner, potentially MVP, to Conor McGregor potentially becoming a free agent, and the most delusional one out of the bunch, this idea that MVP's card on Netflix that did 17 million peak viewers and 12.4 million average would do better on Netflix than the White House card coming up in just over a couple of months here, just under, I guess now. Nakisa, I'll say that again, Nakisa Badarian thinks that the card they put on Netflix would do better if the White House card was also featured on Netflix, and that, to me, is completely delusional and outside of the realm of reality, so we need to talk about it. What is going on over at MVP? Are they trying to be competitors? Are they trying to be an alternative? Are they going to delude themselves into jumping the gun too early, or are they going to do things the right way? I think I know the answer, but let's talk about it. The breakdown, let's go. All right, so like I said, let's talk first off about the ticket sales for the event. Apparently, the capacity for this event was around 15,500 in a capacity venue, which is the Intuit Dome, of 18,000. So I guess maybe because production, the cage itself, whatever else, they couldn't have the 18,000 in there. And here's the tickets they sold.
How do you feel? Because I will be honest, I kept seeing people say there's no one in the stands, and I was there, and I saw a ton of people. I saw it full by the time the main event happened, but I did go and watch it afterwards, and those lights on the seats do create an illusion where it seems like no one is sitting in the seat. In retrospect, and to be clear, that's an Intuit Dome thing. That's not a you thing or a Netflix thing. I don't even know if you can turn those off or if it's a part of the show.
You definitely can turn them off, but I mean, I think the cinematography that it creates is much more important than people without knowledge of what's actually happening in venue talking about there's no fans there. That doesn't bother us. The reality is we sold about 11,300 tickets, over $2.2 million in gate. And we had veterans and different, police force, firemen in attendance as well. If you look at Ronda's first event.
Let's stop it there. So Nakisa says they sold about 11.3 thousand tickets on, again, the arena itself holds 18K. And I told you guys on my review video after the event that I thought that looked like there was about 60 to 70% full in the venue. Now, if there was only 15,000 tickets allotted because of the way the setup was made, that'd be more like an 80 to 85% filled arena to do 11.3 thousand in a 15,500 venue. But then he also says that it was a $2.2 million gate. I want you guys to hold on to that information because we are going to come back to it and essentially disprove what Nakisa is going to say later on. Based on those numbers, I think we can draw a pretty definitive conclusion as to why the answers he gives later are, in my opinion, completely delusional. But also, he's going to make a comparison here to Ronda Rousey's first main event in the UFC and the gate numbers they did that day. And also, I think the gate number from the first Dana White promoted UFC as well, which to me is a bit not even a bit. It's very disingenuous, but we'll take a listen.
We sold about 11,300 tickets, over $2.2 million in gate.
By the way, 2.2 million, not terrible for your first MMA event. If it was void of context, which is that you have Ronda Rousey in the main event, who's from Riverside, California, who is supposed to be, in MVP's own words, one of the biggest stars in MMA. You can't sell out a venue close to your backyard. It seems that that would not necessarily be the case anymore. If you can't sell that venue out and you're not doing what I would think would be a great gate, which would be 3-point-something million in that venue, you maybe aren't as big a star, and that includes Francis, that includes Nate, that includes Mike Perry. You may not be as big a star as you think. No offense to anyone, I'm just saying that's,
And we had veterans and different, police force, firemen in attendance as well. If you look at Ronda's first event at the Honda Center, I think the gate was 1.2 million, right? The first ever UFC women's headlined event did 1.2 million. We did 2.2 million for the first ever MVP MMA event with Ronda Rousey, who people were saying is way past her prime, with Gina Carano, who people are saying is way past her prime.
She is. I mean, Gina hadn't fought in 17 years. Stop.
With Francis Ngannou, who people were saying he doesn't sell.
Francis is provably not sold. These are things that are the truth.
With Nate Diaz saying he's way past his relevancy.
Also correct. So here's where Nakisa is playing a little bit of the, like I said, I would say very disingenuous game. Number one, touting that you do better than Ronda Rousey's first ever main event in the UFC when she was not the name she even is now is not really a flex to me. When the UFC brought Ronda Rousey into their promotion, the partnership between the UFC's rocket ship, and Nakisa knows this, as well as Ronda's quick finishes and astounding athleticism, and it made her a star. But in her first main event, she wasn't that star. She wasn't that level of name. And even now, at 39 years old, she retains somewhat of the name, of the clout, even after the 2 losses that she got from that massive run in the UFC, as well as the movies and etc. Gina Carano, not so much. And funny enough, when we talk about the gate they drew, Ronda Rousey actually drew more people at 13,257 than she did now at $1.3 million in the gate. I think, again, there's a bit of a disingenuous nature to the way that Nakisa's kind of framed this. They sold more tickets at a different price point. Granted, it was 2013. Obviously, we have to factor in inflation. I'm not saying inflation accounts for $900,000. What I am saying is Ronda wasn't at nearly as big a name at that point. She still drew more people, and the money is a bit inflated in the modern era 13 years later. But still, she also drew almost 500,000 pay-per-view buys. And even without Ronda, I mean, we can take a look at Francis Ngannou, who, Nakisa named there as someone that was not a draw. The last time Francis drew big money was in UFC 270 against Cyril Gane in his last fight in the UFC. Since then, and again, that was a nice number, 300,000 to 350,000 pay-per-views. Those never were publicly released, but that's the estimate. And even then, look at that live gate. Massive, right? But afterward, I'm not even going to show the PFL numbers because I know they're that bad, but look at the numbers they drew. Francis and Tyson Fury. Massive boxing fight. Yes, it was in Saudi. Not even 100,000. Francis versus Anthony Joshua. That number is pitiful on DAZN. He also mentioned Nate Diaz, who, yes, was a massive draw in the double fights with Conor and the BMF fight with Jorge Masvidal. But look at the most recent pay-per-view ability from Nate Diaz. Even though he did $500,000 with Jake Paul, we can understand that Jake Paul is the revenue driver there. Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal in their boxing fight in 2024 did at max 30,000 pay-per-views, where it started at $80 and then eventually was slashed to $25. It is a fact that most of these fighters, including Francis, who I think is probably one of the 2 best heavyweights in the world, are not the draw they once were, which is why you didn't sell the venue out and why you didn't get the number that I think Nakisa, Jake, and Netflix were all looking for, which was the 20 million. They got close, and again, it was a massive win for them. But let's not play the disingenuous game where we act like because you did 2.2 million in gate, it was because you had big stars. It wasn't what they were looking for. Obviously, they don't have to say that, but that's the honest truth. They didn't sell it out, and it's because the fighters they used, the names they used, are not draws like they once were. It's that simple. Nakisa also talked about what they want to do at Netflix. Now, this I find interesting. Again, I'm gonna offer some pushback, and this wasn't really delusional as much as it was like disingenuous. This isn't delusional. This is just their plans on Netflix. We'll get into the delusional stuff in a second, but here's what Nakisa says about their MMA events in the future and how they want to partner with Netflix.
Your strategy as of right now, as far as how you would divvy this up, how many events per year, etc.
I would say we're still working on it, but I will say similar to a WWE that's on Netflix every single week, I think for the right opportunity, the right product, there is the potential to do more than what you're saying. Boxing is more difficult to own than MMA. I say own, obviously UFC is the reference brand. They're going to be the reference brand for many years to come, but there's no true number two player. Boxing, there's 6 or 7 of us putting on premium big events every single week.
I just thought of this. Before he finishes, I'm going to make a prediction. I bet you that MVP moves away from boxing little by little and gets into more MMA. They are very strategic in what they do, and I think they know, just like I do and pretty much everyone else does, the competition in boxing right now, especially on the male side, they're taking the female side, but let's be honest, how much money does women's boxing draw? At the end of the day, you need to be a profitable company, and unless you have big partners like Netflix, and I know ESPN is partnered with MVP, but they have to be looking for some sort of numbers, and I just don't know if they're going to cut it numbers-wise on just the women's boxing fights. I think they understand that MMA has a gap right now, and eventually, I think they're going to put more of their cards, almost all of their cards, into MVP MMA if they have a partner like Netflix involved, because they can make more money doing that, and they can promote less shows doing that, and potentially have bigger names doing that than they can in just women's boxing or just Jake Paul boxing right now.
So do I think that we could come in and take real share within the MMA sphere? Yes. Do I believe that we can convince Netflix to do it on a more regular basis than they've shown to do so with boxing? I think if we have the product and we show them the path of how this can work and set expectations appropriately and ask for the right amount of rights fees that are appropriate for that, my hope is that the answer is yes. But I will say there's Amazon, there's Fox, there's ESPN, there's definitely other outlets that once we present them this whole package and what we've done here, will have interest in what we're doing.
In your opinion, what is that number? How many?
But do you hear how he's talking about rights fees and leveraging these massive broadcasters to build something akin to the UFC? Nakisa was the CFO at the UFC. He studied under the Fertittas. He understands how they built the business, along with Dana, but mostly he was studying the Fertittas. And he understands how he is going to try to build MVP MMA in a UFC light style of fashion. Now they're going to use the marketing stuff like fighters first and, you know, fighter pay and all that. And again, it looks like from that first event, they've held their word on fighter pay, at least on that starting level. And who knows what the actual payouts were for the main event people. Now they're going to need, again, a broadcaster to shell that money out, but he knows how this business works, more so than boxing, I would say. I think Nakisa getting into boxing was just a proxy of Jake boxing. I think now that he's back in a business he knows and is more comfortable with, this is where they're going to focus.
Events would you want to put on?
I think it depends on the partner, right? But if I look at Netflix, I would love to be in a situation to have 12 events a year. 1 per month, effectively, would be the ideal.
That is a lot. Right now, when you don't have, you just lost Ronda, unless you can convince her to come back and fight Holly Holm. You can argue the Amanda Nunes loss was the nail in the coffin, but the worst loss, the most devastating loss to Ronda, in my opinion, is the Holly Holm fight. As big a favorite as she was steamrolling everybody. talking her shit, couldn't be beat. Next women's Mike Tyson, and Holly Holm kicks her in the head and hammer fists her to death as like a plus 750 underdog. I don't think you're getting Ronda to go down memory lane again and do that. I just don't think that her ego would allow her to get beat again if that were to be the case. Holly's been more active more often. Listen, if Ronda goes out and wrestles Holly, Ronda could beat her. I know that sounds crazy and people aren't going to believe me. If Ronda had learned to wrestle instead of thinking she was an actual striker, she would have actually beaten Holly Holm. Look at what Miesha Tate did in that fight. In a fight she was losing. Wrestled Holly Holm. Gah-da! Had Holly punching on air. New champ. My point is, I just don't think Ronda mentally wants to go through that again. And she's talking about having babies, all that. So you lose her. And everybody else is a free agent. Namo Fazal, which again is not a massive name yet, but it is an interesting look at what this dichotomy between the UFC and MVP MMA will be. He is signed to go fight in the UFC on the Contender Series. Mike Perry's talking about potentially going back to the UFC. What MVP MMA has is flexibility, which is a good and bad thing. You're giving these guys one-fight deals, paying them a lot of money. They get a lot of freedom in that way. And unless you're starting to lock people down, how are you going to run 12, not just premium events, because I don't think that's what he means. I think he means maybe 3 or 4 premium events, but even just 12 events on Netflix. And how is Netflix going to feel about footing the bill for those? We've seen Netflix operate in the big event business so far throughout their live sports journey, right? Christmas Day NBA games, opening day MLB All-Star game, NFL, Christmas Day as well, and I think even a playoff game maybe. Anthony Joshua, Jake Mike Tyson, Canelo Crawford, Makhmudov, and Tyson Fury in Taylor Serrano 3. Like they're not doing weekly, monthly promotional stuff. So when Nakisa says he's going to have to convince them, he absolutely is. And you're also going to have a somewhat of a roster. They're not going to operate and throw out the 12-fight deal over a year with MVP having no roster and trying to build events one at a time. They're going to want to see something. So that's audacious. I was going to say 4 and just do the big events. Nakisa's talking about doing, I assume, 3 or 4 big events, maybe 2 or 3 big events, and then having consistent talent that's not going to hit that same number. I think that's way more of a challenge.
Scenario.
Do you feel like there are enough big names, stars, draws to put on that many events?
I mean, is there enough big names, stars, draws to put on 42 UFC events?
See, there's where he's wrong. The reason that Netflix is not in the UFC business, one, is because Paramount offered a stupid number, $7.7 billion, to become the licensing partner or the broadcast partner. But also, it was unearthed in negotiations that Netflix didn't want the fight nights. So they were going to have to do Netflix premium cards for the UFC, right? Your numbered events, but fight nights were going to either have to stay on ESPN, split over at Paramount Plus or Amazon or whatever. This defeats what Nakisa's trying to convince Netflix of doing. Because yes, the UFC runs 40 smaller cards a year with their 12 big ones or 13, but it's on Paramount Plus because Netflix didn't want it and because Paramount offered more money. But Netflix was never in the fight night business. So if you're creating your own fight night on Netflix, what's the draw?
I'm asking the questions here, Nakisa, all right?
Well, I know, but
the UFC is the brand. The UFC
every event isn't going to be Rousey Carano, but it's about having a consistent base that delivers a certain viewership number, right? The WWE delivers 2.5 million views on Netflix every single week, pretty consistently. What can we do that delivers a consistent level of ratings that is appropriate for the investment that your distribution partner is making?
I doubt that it would even be 2 whatever million. I assume they wouldn't even be putting the kind of money up, obviously, that they're giving the WWE. So he'd probably have to break $1 million, $1.5 million, whatever it was, to have them convinced that that's something they want to do. So there's that part of it. Again, that's not a delusional take from Nakisa, but it's a far-fetched one. Once a month, and you're talking about doing some smaller fight night cards, I don't think Netflix is going to hop on board with that, especially when you don't have a roster. How are you going to convince them that this is going to work with nobody signed? Everybody that just fought on this Netflix card, as far as I'm aware, is a free agent now, including Ronda Rousey, who wants to be a promoter for MVP MMA. Now, I assume they can get Francis back. I assume they can bring, Nate back, whatever. But I don't. Some level of audacity is what the greats use to become great. So listen, I'm not faulting Nakisa for going out there and being audacious, but that is a lot. I would say again, more like 3 or 4 would make sense. All right, so now let's hear Nakisa talk about the matchmaking. All right, I kind of said, he's audacious when we talk about how Netflix is going to offer up 12 events and fund it and allow MVP to use their platform to build a promotion. That's audacious. Now let's hear where delusional starts, because now Nakisa is going to have to defend the matchmaking, especially on the main card for this card, and it's just not there. You can't tell me that Francis, and you can't tell me these things because it was clear Francis was not going to be competitive with Felipe Lins. Junior Dos Santos was on a massive, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 fight losing streak on his way out of the UFC. 42 years old. Robelis was going to run him over. We knew that. Ronda was surely going to submit Gina in less than a minute. We knew that. The only one you could say going into that main card that was supposed to be competitive, even Pardenas, we knew Pardenas was gonna do work, was the Nate and Mike fight, and that one ended up being leading Old Yeller out to the shed, right? So there is no real way of defending this being competitive matchmaking. You can only say, hey, it was a showcase where we got our guys over pro wrestling style, but this was not meant to be competitive for the most part. And some of these fights, you just have to admit the truth. This was not, no, it was, these were going to be A-side fighters winning A-side fights. That's it. But Nakisa doesn't say that.
Was brought up was the matchmaking. These were one-sided fights. These were squash matches, if you will. What is your response to the criticism of the matchmaking?
I'll say there were some great fights on the card that didn't last one round. I will say that when you have extraordinary talents coming into the cage, that unbelievable things can happen.
I would agree if these things were unbelievable. They weren't. It wasn't unbelievable to think that Francis Ngannou was going to finish Felipe Lins in one round. That was the believable answer. In fact, he was a minus favorite to do that. It wasn't unbelievable to think that Mike Perry was going to beat Nate Diaz. Now, you could say it was unbelievable how bad Diaz looked. I'd give you references to his fight with Jake Paul, to his fight with Jorge Masvidal in boxing as of recently, even his fight in even his last UFC fight against Tony Ferguson before the submission, the fight with Jorge in MMA. Like, you could go back a while now and see that Nate hasn't been right in a good long time. Gina Carano was 40-something years old, hadn't fought in 17 years, lost 100 pounds to even make weight. Junior Dos Santos, like I said, on a massive losing streak on his way out of the UFC. These things weren't unbelievable. These were very believable matchups for what happened. The execution of these matchups was exactly what the believable outcome was.
Of course, the Ronda Gina outcome for me was very expected, right? That's what Ronda Rousey does. Now, that I think that Gina Carano could do something that would negate that? Absolutely. There's a former...
What percentage chance, Nakisa?
MMA fighter who never... What's Matt Brown? Mm-hmm. Matt Brown was going into this fight saying a lot of negative things, but was very clear that Gina Carano was going to win. Post-fight, very clear that it was all a hoax and we were sold, and Ronda Rousey was always going to do this.
There was no hoax in terms of like fight fixing. That's not the truth. And if you didn't think that Ronda was going to do this, then I don't know what to tell you. This would have happened when they were in their primes, y'all. Gina was never the level of Ronda Rousey in their prime. So no, if you didn't expect Ronda to win by submission, I don't know what you were looking at, but it was still sold as a competitive fight when we all knew it wouldn't be. You got to hold that.
I have messages from Vitor Belfort, from Karate Hottie, from Dan Henderson. We've put them up saying Gina Carano was going to win. There was many within the MMA community.
This is like when everyone that were fans of Mike Tyson, in his prime, not when he was 58, 59, were coming out of the woodwork to say that Mike was going to smash Jake. Mike was going to do this, do that. Mike was going to take his head off. And everyone with a brain, or at least that had kept up with what happened to Mike post-career, went, no, Jake's going to hurt the old man. He can barely move. And to be like, MVP did this same shit before the fight. They were putting up messages of people being like, oh, Mike's going to kill him. We knew better. That doesn't help your case just by going, oh, hey, Dan Henderson said it. Dan Henderson's like 50-something years old. And as much damage as he took in his career, we're talking CTE, buddy. Same with Vitor. What are we saying? These people aren't known for their MMA analyzation. I don't care if they're former fighters. We knew what was happening.
I thought Gina was going to win. Ronda just did what she's best at doing and implemented it and did it in 17 seconds, and we got 17 million viewers. In terms of the Nate and Mike fight, I think we all were surprised it stopped when it did. And
what? What? I was not surprised that fight was stopped when it was. Nate was getting butchered, literally elbows slashing his head open. He was bleeding out of the back of his head somehow. That fight should have been stopped before then. And it would have gotten worse. And they're talking about doing a rematch. You'll hear in this segment, Nakisa straight up looks into the camera and is like, I want to see a rematch between Nate and Mike Perry. Why? Would anyone want to see that? This is what the issue is with matchmaking. You don't have enough talent yet, so you're relying on the names you have. But we just watched that fight not be competitive at all. The only thing Nate did was land a throw and immediately gave up position. He got butchered. We don't want to see a rematch of that. Why? For it to happen again and worse? For Nate to sound like he's drunk throughout the entire build-up, slurring his words all over the place? Why? No, dude.
I would love to see that rematch.
No! How are you going to defend the matchmaking? Then go see Nate get butchered. I mean, taken to the shop, and they take out the cleaver on him. And then say, oh, we were surprised when it ended, like the fight was remotely competitive. And then say you want to see the rematch. Why? Mike killed him. That's the issue with the matchmaking.
Francis against Philippe Lins. Was that one-sided? No, I thought it was a tough.
All right. Yeah. This is what I'm saying, man. You got to have some... You got to have some level of reality check here, because that was not a competitive fight. Because Philippe Lins survived for 4 minutes, it's all of a sudden a heavy competition? Stop it.
Tough battle for Philippe, and I thought he hung in there. And, you know, Francis caught him with a perfect shot to the top of the head.
Francis hit him with a left hook, and Philippe Lins went to another universe, which everybody predicted. It was why Francis was a minus 2,000 favorite. You're going to tell me that that's good matchmaking. Listen, I understand why it happened, but don't defend it as a competitive fight. Just say, yeah, the Francis versus Philippe fight, it was a showcase of Francis's skills because he's the best heavyweight in the world. And unless we have John Jones or Tom Aspinall or Cyril Gane on the roster, he'll do that to literally anybody. That's the way you defend that. Not being like, yeah, it was competitive, but Francis just caught him. Stop it. Also, Rico Verhoeven, if they could have made that fight, I would have given them credit. It wasn't their fault. He took not their fault. He took a different offer. But don't gaslight us.
That resulted in that knockout. But I thought he performed very well. And then, you know, I look at the other two main fights on the card, Saladin versus Ken Cross. Saladin's a special talent. And with JDS versus Big Boy Robles, that fight could have ended that way either way. It was about...
Sure. If Robles doesn't move and stands there, yeah. But skill for skill, mileage on the tank, Robles was going to smoke him, and we knew it.
Who caught who first?
He was a minus 500 favorite or something like that.
And Robles caught JDS.
Earlier this morning, Mike Perry tweeted they're really talking about this rematch, and I'm assuming the they is you guys. And so what could you tell us about these quote-unquote talks?
No.
I think their respective teams have gotten a line that they would like to do it. I think from our perspective,
Mike has said multiple times he didn't really feel comfortable doing this rematch. Like, he's like, why? I'm going to kill him. Why? Like, Mike was on Ariel's show saying that it didn't really make a lot of sense to do. Like, they just trying to feed me Nate again. Literally said those words. So when we're talking about teams being on the same page, Mike looks at it as a fucking easy bag because it is, and Nate is deluded and needs to be saved from himself.
We think that's a great headline event. we haven't advanced the ball more than that. I think Nate needs a little bit of time to recover, and then we'll get together and figure out what's the right strategy. But I think they both deserve that rematch. I don't think Mike wanted the fight to end that way.
Huh? What does that mean? Mike didn't want, Mike wanted it to go the distance? Mike wanted to knock him out? Like, Mike fucking butchered him and stopped him. It's not more definitive than what we saw, other than Nate spazzing on the ground dead. I don't know. What are we talking about here? He stopped him. Nate had zero chance of winning that fight, dude. Zero. Zilch. Nada.
Has anyone been signed post Saturday? Are there any fighters under contract with MVP MMA as of right now?
No, but Namo Fazil seems to be under contract with UFC.
All right. So there you see, again, I'm not sitting here looking for Nakisa to apologize for booking what he booked, because it was a showcase of Ronda. It was to showcase Francis. It was to showcase the big names of Nate and Mike, and try to make something happen with Robelis to Spain. A very talented heavyweight striker. But just don't act like this was remotely competitive, even in the matchmaking for some of these fights. But then we get to this little sweet, juicy nugget of delusion. Somehow he's got this delusion, alien level, that his card, Rousey Carano, 17 million, would do better on Netflix than if you put the White House card late June on Netflix as well. Obviously, currently, the UFC is with Paramount, 70 to 80 million subscribers on that side. Netflix holds a 5 times multiple at 350 million subscribers. But Nakisa still thinks that if you brought the stars, the biggest names currently in the UFC, over with the build of the White House, with the President of the United States, with everything that goes into that Ronda, Gina Carano do better. Listen at this.
The question is, if you put the White House card on Netflix, does it do as well as what we did on Saturday night? I don't believe it does, because I think the magic of it was with the names that we had, with the partnership of MVP and Netflix. That's what made it so powerful. And I think they're very happy with the outcome.
You are high if you think that Ronda Rousey and Gina Carano do bigger numbers on a 350 million user platform than the UFC's White House card. Evidence number one, they didn't even sell the venue out. They just did and I said you guys should remember this, they just did a $2.2 million gate in Ronda's backyard, essentially, in Los Angeles, and sold 11,000 of 15 and change. The UFC, the last time the UFC did that number, $2.2 million gate, now this is just the gate I'm saying, was in 2022 on a Singapore card. The UFC just did a card in Australia and did 3-point-something million at the gate for a fight night card. If you would have put Sean Strickland and Hamzat Chimaev on Netflix, they would have fucking squashed this MVP MMA card. Squashed it completely. You can look at every metric across the board leading into that card and tell the difference there. But you're going to convince me that the names you had, and I just showed the pay-per-view numbers for everybody involved outside of Ronda. She is the solo draw of that card. Her name is the solo draw of that card. You're telling me that more people around the world are going to tune in to watch that than world-renowned superstar Ilia Topuria, Top Toro, and his massive, massive fan base in Spain and Georgia. You're going to tell me that more people on a worldwide platform that isn't pay-per-view are going to tune in than they would for Alex Pereira, let's say, who just did 615,000 buys against Jamal Hill and has done gates of 16.5 million or 15.9 million, who also represents Brasilia while having a massive American fan base. Cyril Gane, who is a massive name in Francais. These are the people. Sean O'Malley, who is at least touted by the UFC as somewhat of a pay-per-view draw, along with the fact, whether you like this or not, that Donald J. Trump will be their cage side, and that this will be a rah-rah America politics, fucking fighter jets, B-2 bombers, fireworks, bald eagles type of event. You don't think that this would do better viewers on Netflix than Gina Carano and Ronda Rousey? You are out of your fucking mind. I don't even know how to that's delusion. That's where I can't take Nakisa's opinion on things seriously. I think Nakisa's a great businessman. I think he understands MMA. I think he understands marketing. I think he understands the business side. Profitability versus losing money. Something PFL and One Championship cannot figure out. And they've been in business for fucking decades. They haven't been in business. They've been alive somehow, barely dragging limbs along for decades. Nakisa's going to lap them in 2 years, 3 years. But he won't convince me that that shit right there makes any sense. He won't. And at that, you can say that's marketing. You can say that's Nakisa just trying to promote his card and promote the names he had. But you're out of your fucking mind if you believe that if these things were on the same platform that the White House card would do worse. There's just no way. There's no way. I like Nakisa. I think he's, like I said, I've said it many times in this video, I think he's a good businessman. I think he's building a business that'll sustain far better than anybody outside of the UFC has done in MMA because he understands the business. He was once a part of the business. I think he's been disingenuous in this video over the matchmaking, the reason for the gate in the venue for the stars the UFC currently has outside of Conor McGregor, which we know Conor is the biggest star. And by the way, before we get out of here, Conor has 2 fights left on his deal. Would he ever entertain going and working with Nakisa for a Jake Paul boxing / MMA fight? He's talking about making Conor and Nate Diaz. That fight's dead, right? That fight's never happening. But it's possible that Conor could leave and go do something like this. I don't know. We'll see. Conor's been very frustrated, clearly, with his UFC deal for a long time. But I think his loyalty to Dana might trump that. Regardless, Nakisa has, in this video, said some very interesting things about his relationship and partnership with the Netflix people and how they want to move forward. I think some of it is audacious, which I applaud because they need to be right now. I think some of it is downright delusion. But regardless, expect MVP MMA to be successful. Expect them to destroy PFL and One Championship and really any other lower level MMA promotion in the game that is looking for that number 2 spot. They're going to destroy them in a matter of a year to 2 years. It's going to be a cakewalk for Nakisa and Jake to do that. But let's not act like that on any level they are competitors to the UFC. They are not that. Not yet, and not for a long time. And they certainly, if given the same platform, would not be doing better numbers than the UFC White House card. Again, I would put up there that Hamzat and Sean would have done better numbers if they were on Netflix just a couple of weeks ago. But that's what I think. Jake has thrived off being delusional for a very long time in his combat sports career. And some of that, it clearly has rubbed off on Nakisa. Nothing wrong with it, but we got to tell the truth from time to time. So that's what I think. You guys let me know. Am I the crazy one here? Am I the one that's got it all wrong? Hit the comments and tell me. And what happens for MVP MMA and their partnership with Netflix? Are they going to do 12 events a year? Are they going to find big names? Are free agents going to look to them and partner up and keep this train rolling? I think so, but I don't have those answers. So guess we'll find out.